Because the Batman's traditionally stoic character, it's often difficult to express his emotions on page without just overtly having him smile or panic with his mouth agape. So there's often some kind of workaround the artists have to take in order to make those emotions land and make sense on paper without just overtly saying, I'm upset, or having him kind of hands on hips or something like that. And I think the artist Tim Sale does this very well on his three works with Jeff Loeb, Haunted Night, Long Halloween, and Dark Victory. And there's two examples throughout these pieces that I think illustrate these concepts very well. Firstly, Batman's body language, how he's leaning, how he's sitting up, where his hands are, and secondly, his cape. It has a lot of emotions flowing through it, almost as if it's an extension of Batman himself. Firstly, I would like to look at how Batman is illustrated to be very stoic and collected throughout. Obviously, there's ways to do it with his face, but if we were to ignore that, how would I point out definitively that Batman is self-confident and cool in these moments? Beginning with Long Halloween, you can see Tim Sale even does this by order of contrast, by Selina Kyle's very bending and action-filled movements that are very much on the aggressive, while Batman contrasts that with his collected, upright position, just deflecting and trying to get through the situation. Later on in the comic, we see his interaction with Gordon and Dent, where he has this kind of upright posture and he's holding his cape to kind of cover himself and just kind of be his own individual. He's very calm and collected in these panels. And of course, he kind of breaks character right here with that clenching of fists. He opens up his cape because he's just kind of thinking about what they're speaking of, and it kind of overwhelms him. He does collect himself again, and he takes these instances very seriously. Much later in the comic, you see him interacting with Dent again, this time reminiscing on that deal they made, and now what's going through Batman's head is all the stuff that's happened in the comic since, all the murders, and kind of just the shenanigans Batman's had to put up with. And you can see he still has that straight posture. He hasn't actually broken himself, but those emotions are flowing out through his cape, and you can see that as he talks to Dent. Later on, when he's interacting with the Riddler, it's also kind of humorous that he's not giving him the time of day at all. He normally uses some kind of intimidation tactics with these headline enemies, but for him, he's not having it. He's standing up straight. He's not even getting on his level, and his body posture illustrates that well. And the final spread of the comic has him standing up straight, head over left shoulder, kind of triumphant but reminiscing. In my notes I wrote down, he has a despite it all kind of look. And I think his posture illustrates that well. His face, again, obviously it's serious, and he's kind of thinking about everything that's happened in the last 360 pages. But also, I think his posture reflects that last line, I believe in Batman. He has to put himself on his own shoulders here. Moving on to Dark Victory, when he's interacting with Robin as the Batman for the first time, he does have a stoic, confident feel to him. You see him actually crouching down and kind of hunkering his posture to get to him. And that's him kind of lending a hand as much as he could and saying, I'm here, there are good forces left. But he's still doing that in a very much serious, classic Batman demeanor. And that continues when he gets the jump on this villain who is messing with Dick Grayson. And there's not a lot of emotions flying here. He's very serious. He knows the severity of the situation, not just because it's a bad man doing something, but also because it's someone he cares about. So he's taking it at hyper precaution. And he has just super straight posture with everything, and he's getting down and he's really intimidating this guy. You know, the circus is off limits, right? It's a funny line, but it carries a lot of weight, and especially it shows a lot about what Batman actually cares about, just that posture. He's taking this at the utmost severity. Despite all the events that are happening in Dark Victory, he's still taking such a high priority in this kid, and that comes through with his posture. And at the very last panel of Haunted Night, you see him giving out trick-or-treating candy to trick-or-treaters. But why I find this interesting is because he's doing it on his own volition. He wants to do it after, as you should know, the events of the comic. He's kind of scarred and very introspective. So when he's handing out those candies, he's really doing it on his own volition, and that comes through with his posture, how his shoulders are kind of down, not that typical kind of big brooding Batman or Bruce Wayne posture. He's doing it as just someone who's giving out candy to trick-or-treaters. He, as a person, wants to do this, and that comes through with just very kind of relaxed, upright posture. Next, I want to look at that cape I mentioned earlier. Like I said, it carries a lot of emotions, and I actually want to look at the exact panel that originally tipped me off to this even being a feature at all in Tim's work. And it's right here in page 88, after his interaction with the Calendar Man. Tim Sale was willing to use different parts of Batman to illustrate how he feels in the moment. And you can see this in his wild, chaotic cape coming through after his interaction with Calendar Man. Looking closer just on a few pages prior, you can see his cape kind of flaring up as he's thinking about kind of the situation that he's in. And the second he actually goes to speak with Calendar Man, his demeanor changes. His cape straightens out, and he's just concerned about getting that information out of Calendar Man. And of course, once that interaction ends, that's when you see that really big flare up at the end. And jumping around here, you see this again with his interaction with Catwoman. He's kind of thinking, I don't have time for this. There's bigger stuff going on, and I really can't deal with Catwoman right now. Farther along with this interaction with the Joker on the airplane, you see him struggling the whole time to get a hold of Joker and get a hold of the situation as a whole. And when he eventually loses his cape, often the signifier of his worries, he gains confidence, and he loses the cape, he loses his worries, and he's able to seize the day and actually get the job done. And you can see this at this last panel. You know, he's without his cape, he is without worries. Tim is very intentional with how he uses this to illustrate his emotions. And here, when he's interacting with Falcone, he kind of enters with this big swath of cape to kind of grab his attention and say, hey, I'm here, look at me. I'm a threat right now, and I really need to kind of bug you on some stuff. And then after which, you kind of see his cape settle down. So he uses it as if diegetically to get attention from the characters. And in contrast, you also see his cape being used in times of like seriousness, and not to necessarily show that he's kind of panicking or freaking out, but also to illustrate how he's very serious about the situation. And oftentimes comes up with Catwoman as well, where his cape kind of turns into what I call kind of a line, as opposed to the previous examples of it being kind of wide and freaky. And towards the end of the comic, you also see him again interacting with the Roman, and his cape in this situation is just as a normal cape would react. It's just kind of flowing there. There's not much emotion going through Batman right now. He's very serious, and he's focused on the task at hand, and he really doesn't have time for the Roman's shenanigans. And during the last fight of the comic, when he's kind of going at all the headline villains, when he enters the scene, of course the gravity is causing this as well, but also I think it is intentional to illustrate his emotions. His cape is just a straight line, which fits well because the internal monologue as he's fighting is going through how his dad would approach complicated surgeries, and he would go one by one, eliminating the highest risk target first and then going downward from there, and having that surgical straight man approach. And I think the cape illustrates that well. About midway through Dark Victory, when he's having that wild interaction with the Penguin and there's a shootout, you can see his cape first beginning to be very straight as he's tackling a few individuals head on, and then you kind of get this wild like, dang it, what am I dealing with moment, and his cape flares up again, only to then go back to his more surgical approaches, and his cape flattens out because he's kind of in the zone. He knows what he's doing. He's tackling enemies one by one. And then when he interacts with the Penguin shortly after, he's doing something that I'll get at later, but when he approaches kind of the more superstitious freak villains, as the comics call them, Batman kind of goes into a different mode in an attempt to intimidate these villains. And you see that with the cape flaring up, of course, but he also has some different modes at his disposal. Just this moment is very cool because he's not doing it so much as he's panicking, more as I'm kind of mad right now and I need to intimidate this guy, this little this little punk that's in my way right now. I think it's a good blend. Later on in Dark Victory, we also get a very clear example of Batman keeping his cool. The cape reflects that. And then when he does lose his cool physically by breaking the monitor, his cape flares up to kind of show that. And if you look at every single panel, his facial expressions are essentially identical, a copy and paste. But a lot of that emotion comes through his body language, how he's moving forward, and that cape. And there's another whole aspect about how Tim Sale illustrates Batman, and it's when he interacts with Selina Kyle or Catwoman. He takes on a very different posture and kind of mobility strategy around her. And I think what ends up happening is that he's actually very shy around her, and he's trying to hide that as best he can, but it comes through to the reader. And it is a small detail, but I think how consistent Tim does it throughout all the comics, it really sails it. So right here in Long Halloween, when he's interacting with Catwoman, he grabs his cape around him and kind of holds it to him. It almost looks like it's just a blanket for a child or something, but he's doing this maybe as a nervous tick, but also to maybe shield him from Selina as like a little barrier, as he thinks he could possibly uphold, because he doesn't want her getting in the way of anything else. So he's holding that blanket, but it kind of comes through as just him being a shy person, and he's not this perfect soldier that's Batman. He has these little errors within him, and when he's around Catwoman, that comes out as him being a little bit of a child with that blanket, right? And later on we see a lot of leniency he gives to her. I mean, she's playing with a very serious aspect of the Batman mythos, which is that bat signal, and he just kind of walks up to her, hands on hips. It's not a toy, and it's that's so much leniency. Anyone else would do that. I mean, he wouldn't even walk up to them and say that that's wrong. He would just take care of it without mentioning anything. But hands on hips is such a funny, like, oh darn it, kind of way to illustrate that. And even on this last panel of the next page, you see him grabbing that cape again. He has this issue with Catwoman, and he really wants to protect himself from it, but he just can't. And Batman not only does it solely with Selina Kyle, he also does it with other characters that he feels particularly attached to. And in this later panel, you see him grabbing his cape again, when he's having a tough conversation about what Harvey has been up to as Two-Face, and he's kind of cringing at the thought of it. He's fiddling with his cape, he's grabbing it to protect him from all the emotions that he's feeling. It's his comfort blanket in a way. It's a very specific thing that Tim does, but he always does it with Batman has very strong emotional ties to a specific character. And towards the end, he does it again in the context of Two-Face. He's protecting himself from all these emotions that he's feeling. In Dark Victory, during the dinner scene between Bruce and Selina, you can see Selina leaning into the table to try to get closer to Bruce while he has that just upright posture, head on headrest mentality, and he's not really interested in what Selina has to say at the moment because the events of the comic are taking place, and he can't stand being distracted. And we even see Selina get closer in the next panel and really lean in, and his posture just stays static, which I think is a good contrast to just a few pages forward. We see him interacting with Zuko, and now he's doing that bend forward thing to get close to Zuko because he does want this. He didn't want Selina at that night, but with Zuko, he has such a high priority for him, and to get information out of him, he does lean towards Zuko while Zuko kind of has that scared posture to him, right? And he's not leaning into Batman. He doesn't want to be close to that guy. But Batman just gets really up close to him, about as close as Selina wanted him to be to her. And later on in the comic, as a final note to him interacting with Selina, he has a conversation with her, and he's very unsatisfied with the answer that he got from her. Like I mentioned before, his cape flare up in relation to Selina. There's also a very rare state that Tim Sale has to illustrate in these comics, which is Batman just in panic and being caught off guard. It's a pretty rare thing, and I only found about 3 examples of it happening where his body language actually reflects that state. But first, we see it midway through Dark Victory, where he's caught just in the police's floodlights. He's hunched down and he's looking for a way to go left or right, and he hasn't made up his mind yet. And he's very much in panic. You rarely see this in Batman. He's normally never kind of at that hunch, broken posture stance. When he's strung up by the noose, you see his legs flailing. This is not a very common position you see Batman in. He's trying to figure out the situation as it's unraveling before him, and his body and cape are just kind of going side to side rather than the typical body language and posture he has, which is kind of alert at all times. This is completely broken him. And jumping back to that plane scene during Long Halloween, right before his cape gets snatched off by the feller, he's really flailing against the Joker. It's starting to set in that if he doesn't do something very soon, there will be consequences, so he has to act fast. And once again, we see that kind of limbs going everywhere posture from him, where it really shows how much of a panic he's in. There's a couple more instances that I want to point out from Batman's body languages and Tim's work, and a few of them come from Batman being in what I call kind of like his freak pose. And by freak, I mean that in the Batman sense of like Batman and Joker and Poison Ivy, how the gangsters refer to those individuals as freaks, and I mean that in that sense, where Batman, he's dealing with Maroni's kind of low-level guys, and he hunches down, and he's like a goblin, he's like a gargoyle, and he's really getting in their face and freaking them out, because a normal human wouldn't jump from above and land on your car. Now, Batman isn't just doing this as a typical intimidation tactic, he's also doing it because he knows Gotham's underworld is particularly superstitious, so when he kind of gets down low like that, he's illustrating that, and he's getting up in their face and proving the point that these guys can be frightened incredibly easily. And what I really like is that as soon as Maroni comes out, bam, posture straightens out, and he knows who he's dealing with. He knows that kind of superstitious who isn't going to work against Maroni, so he stands up straight and even says he's a smart man, so he's not going to fall for that kind of weird freak gremlin position. Jumping over to Dark Victory, we see him again on that hunch down kind of, I'm getting in your face and I'm weird and I'm on your level and I'm a little crazy freak position, as I called it, with the Riddler, because the Riddler is very much subject to that weird superstition that Batman has pointed out many times in his comics. And the very last emotion that I want to highlight that I think Tim Sale illustrates very well is when Batman is what I wrote down as processing, where that could mean he's either cold and distant or he's just trying to figure out something in the moment, so he's kind of not present completely. Towards the end of Dark Victory, you see this when he's interacting with James Gordon. He's of course at a physical distance from Gordon, but he's also upright posture, cape completely covering his body, where he's just kind of this black and blue mass, and his cape, as I said, is flaring up a little bit, so he is kind of concerned about the situation. And earlier in the comic, when he's just wailing on the Joker, you see him kind of lose his posture and on that last panel kind of process what just happened, how he just really went to town on him, and he probably doesn't like that happened very much, and he most likely did it because of the events preceding. And farther in, you see him peering over the sewage gates as Gotham PD raids what they believe to be a criminal base. And I wrote down that Batman has his skin in the game on this one, and he's very concerned. His cape is flaring up and he's peering from above, and he's kind of just this little gremlin man who's just very concerned and watching over them and just waiting for a moment for him to be useful. Jumping back to Haunted Night, after he's cared for by a doctor, he's kind of processing what it meant to get help at this point, because again, this is very early in Batman's career, so he's not quite grabbing his cape as a habit yet, but he does have a hand kind of protecting him from his emotions, and he's thinking, oh no, am I useless? Do I always need help to get anything done? And he's trying to process that, and that turned away fist over chest posture kind of signals that. And the last example I want to highlight for him being kind of processing and isolated is when Batman's watching a criminal make bail in less than an hour, and he's upset about it, but I kind of wrote down that he's aggravated, but he knew it. He knew that was going to happen. He knows how this game works. So his cape's flaring up a bit, but he's kind of, head down, a bit disappointed in all the actions, and he's thinking there's a lot of work to do, and that kind of posture shows it. I'm sure there are other examples of Tim Sale and other artists illustrating Batman to have more emotions beyond just his face, but these are just some standout examples I thought were very interesting and worth sharing. If you have any that you really like and would like to share, please comment them below, and thanks for watching.